Until proven otherwise, anything can be considered a dream. Lilith woke up with a throbbing headache that made her crave more sleep to escape the pain. However, the world had other plans as the sun's rays seeped through her curtains and into her eyes, forcing her to wake up. She let out a long sigh of annoyance and covered her head with a pillow. Despite her desire to continue sleeping, she knew it was a workday, and she had to go to her retail job like everyone else. She would have to endure the monotony until 7 p.m. when she could finally leave, go home, eat a depressing meal of fast food, and sleep before starting all over again until the weekend. Lilith threw the pillow aside and got out of bed. She went to the bathroom and turned on the shower, causing steam to fog up the mirror. Lilith wiped it away and examined her reflection, noticing her deeply dark-circled eyes and stringy hair. Suddenly, she saw a flash of red in the reflection. She turned around but found nothing there. She shook her head and let out a high-pitched laugh, realizing that she needed her coffee. Lilith stepped into the shower, hoping the warm water would cleanse her mind of the disturbing image that had been plaguing her thoughts. As she closed her eyes and turned off the water, she realized she had lingered in the shower longer than she should have. With a sense of urgency, Lilith rushed through the rest of her morning routine, chugging a full cup of coffee in one gulp before grabbing her bag and darting out of her apartment. But as she turned down the hallway, she collided with a man, causing her to stumble back. Although Lilith managed to keep her balance, the man didn't even pause to apologize before continuing on his way, his attention drawn to a flickering light. "Asshole!" Lilith shouted after him, but he didn't look back. Rolling her eyes, she muttered to herself before rushing outside. To her surprise, the once sunny day had turned dreary and gray, signaling an impending storm. Lilith blinked in disbelief before setting off on her way, knowing she didn't have time to confront the rude man who had crossed her path. As Lilith gazed up at the sky, a sudden gust of wind jolted her back to reality. She sighed, thinking that if she didn't need the money, she would have stayed in bed. The day already seemed strange, but she had no choice but to soldier on. She hurried towards her car, which was parked a short distance away from the building. Despite the light drizzle, she managed to reach it without getting too wet. Fortunately, her workplace was just 10 minutes away by car. Even if she was running late, it wasn't a big deal. The drive was smooth and uneventful, and she arrived at the office just as the clock struck 7:30. She punched in, feeling relieved that Kelly wouldn't have a reason to complain. Lilith walked over to her register, ready to assist the growing number of customers waiting to check out. Lilith offered a smile as she greeted the customers, but they seemed unresponsive, glaring right through her. She muttered under her breath, "Okay," and proceeded to enter her employee code to unlock the register. However, an error message appeared on the screen. Code invalid. Frustrated, Lilith hit the backspace key and retyped her code, but the same message appeared again. She turned to the waiting customers, apologizing. "I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on with this register," but was interrupted by a familiar, overly cheerful voice. Kelly approached them, effortlessly unlocking the register with a ding. Lilith couldn't help but wonder what was wrong with her own code. "Kelly, what's going on with my code? Why isn't it working?" she asked, looking from the register to Kelly. However, Kelly remained silent as she began ringing up the first customer. Lilith tried to get Kelly's attention by waving her hand in front of her face, but Kelly didn't respond. Lilith thought the only explanation was that she must have been fired, and Kelly, who always avoided conflict, was avoiding telling her. "Kelly, just tell me if I'm fired," Lilith said, trying to be mature about it. She knew she would be upset since she had just wasted gas to get there, but she wouldn't take it out on Kelly. Kelly continued to scan items and make small talk with customers, which started to make Lilith nervous. She reached out to grab Kelly, but her hand passed right through her, like a light in the mist. Kelly's only reaction was a shiver, while Lilith stumbled back in shock, her eyes widening and her heart pounding in her ears. "What the hell?" she exclaimed, looking down at her hand with fear. She stared at her own hand for a moment, but it appeared perfectly normal. Lilith let out a shaky breath and stepped around the counter to touch an elderly woman, but she was interrupted by a voice. "What are you doing?" the voice asked. Lilith looked down to see a little girl, no older than 5 or 6, standing beside her. The girl had bright green eyes and wore a bright red raincoat that stood out even in the light. "You can see me?" Lilith asked, on the brink of a panic attack. She struggled to catch her breath. The little girl tilted her head to the side and gave Lilith a sweet smile. "Of course you can, silly. You can see me after all." Lilith inquired, "Why are you the only one?" The young girl retorted, "Why do you assume that I would know?" Lilith turned away and massaged her head, which was causing her immense pain. "This can't be happening," she muttered to herself. "It's not real. I'm probably still in bed sleeping and I'll wake up any minute now. Then I'll laugh about it over coffee and happily take Kelly's insults at work." The little girl grabbed onto Lilith's shirt and asked, "What are you talking about?" Lilith opened her eyes and gazed down at the child. Her voice quivering, she asked, "What's going on?" The little girl gazed at her with innocent eyes, but Lilith eventually pulled away and made her way towards the front doors, weaving through the crowd without regard for anyone she bumped into. As she stepped outside, Lilith pulled out her keys and didn't care about the rain anymore. It was the least of her concerns. The little girl called out to her, "Where are you going?" But Lilith shouted back, "Home!" before clicking the unlock button and opening the car door. After struggling with her keys for a moment, Lilith jammed the key into the slot and started the engine. As she attempted to reverse, she let out a piercing scream instead of pulling out. The little girl she had seen in the store earlier was in the back seat of her car, and Lilith was perplexed. "Why are you screaming?" the little girl asked. Lilith, stunned, demanded to know how the girl had gotten into her car. The little girl responded matter-of-factly, "Because I want to go with you. You're the only one who talks to me." Lilith was taken aback, but didn't have the time to deal with this. "Fine," she said, pulling out of the parking lot and onto the street. "Why are you headed back to your apartment?" the little girl asked. "I'm not," Lilith replied. "I'm going to see my family. My mom lives 15 minutes away. She'll know what to do. She always does." The little girl questioned why Lilith believed her mother would be able to see her when no one else could. Lilith's heart sank at the thought of no one being able to see or hear her. However, she held on to the hope that her mother would be able to help her. Lilith's head throbbed with pain as she spoke. "She'll fix this." The girl beside her remained silent, and the car was filled with an uneasy silence for a few moments. Lilith couldn't take it anymore and had to break it. "What's your name?" she asked. The little girl, staring out of the window at the pouring rain, replied, "Az." Lilith was curious. "Does that mean something?" "It might," Az responded. "What does it mean?" Lilith asked as she pulled into her mother's driveway. "You'll find out soon," Az said, causing Lilith to turn around in surprise as she had silently crept up behind her. Though Lilith made a face at the vague response, she was distracted when she saw the front door of her mother's house wide open. Lilith dodged the girl and ran up the driveway, but as she approached the door, she slowed down. The rain had intensified, enveloping the world in a hazy curtain of water, yet Lilith was impervious to its touch. She crossed the threshold of the same white door she had known since childhood and halted in her tracks, surveying the living room. Familiar faces surrounded her, individuals she had not laid eyes on in years. Aunt May, Uncle Dave, whom she had not seen since she was 6, Riley Ross and Stephen Norm from high school, and June and Jason, the twins she used to babysit over a decade ago. Despite the room being fully illuminated, the mood was somber, and everyone was dressed in black and gray. Lilith's heart sank. Was her mother hurt? She couldn't recall the last time she spoke to her, or even saw her, now that she thought about it. As Lilith walked into the room and stood next to her aunt, her stomach dropped to her knees. Her voice breaking, she asked, "Where is Mama?" But her aunt remained silent, looking through Lilith with pained eyes before turning away to address Uncle Dave. "We really should get going. There's nothing more for us to do here." Lilith stepped aside as they headed for the front door, opening their umbrellas as they went. She followed behind, and as they stepped outside, Az's voice sounded behind her. "Why do you want to see where they're going?" Although unsure if she really wanted to, Lilith replied, "I just need to. It's like something is pulling me." As they joined their family and friends outside, Lilith stopped dead in her tracks. Her heart sank as they made their way towards the line of parked cars on the sidewalk. Lilith exclaimed, "What the hell?" But no one paid attention as she stared at the empty spot where her car was parked. "Well, you could always join your friends. There seems to be a seat left," a voice said. Shivering, Lilith turned and saw an available seat next to Stephen Norm, her high school crush. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath before making her way to the seat just as the door was closing. As the door closed, Lilith saw Az standing in front of it. "What are you going to do?" Lilith asked. "I'll see you there," Az replied. Lilith stared at Az until the door shut, and the car drove away. Before turning the corner, she looked back and realized Az had disappeared. The ride was quiet, and the rain hitting the car was the only sound. Lilith wondered where they were going as she gazed out the window, her heart pounding in her ears. She worried if it had something to do with her mom. The sinking feeling in her gut told her it wasn't good. Eventually, they arrived at the location Lilith had hoped they wouldn't, the peaceful cemetery. "No," Lilith whispered as she watched everyone start to disembark. "This can't be happening." She stepped out of the vehicle slowly, trying to suppress the fear that was rising inside her as she followed Uncle Dave. As they walked through the labyrinth of gravestones that seemed to be leading them to an unknown destination, Lilith felt her heartbeat increase. She sensed that the maze held something she didn't want to discover. Lilith's heart sank when she saw a row of chairs positioned in front of an open casket. People dressed in black were scattered about the white folded-out chairs, their sorrow palpable in the damp, rainy air. "Oh God," Lilith murmured as she approached and recognized familiar faces, old and new friends, relatives she hadn't seen in years. Her body felt numb as she searched the crowd frantically for her mother. "Whom are you searching for?" Az inquired, smiling at her as she turned around in a daze. "How did you get here?" Lilith demanded, her voice laced with anger. "What are you?" The girl before her only smiled, her gaze drifting past Lilith's shoulder. "Is that the woman you were searching for?" Lilith spun around, her heart soaring with hope as she spotted her mother sitting in the front row of chairs. But when she approached her, she hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. "Mom, it's me," Lilith said, her voice shaking. "Look at me." For a brief moment, her mother's eyes met hers, and Lilith's hope surged. But then her mother's gaze drifted away, and she walked straight through Lilith as though she were a ghost. Lilith was left standing, feeling as though she had been torn in two. Her head throbbed painfully, and something wet trickled down the side of her face. But the pain in her chest was far more intense, like a stabbing sensation through her heart. "That wasn't what you wanted, was it?" The girl's words sliced through Lilith like a knife. Lilith hugged herself tightly as her body went numb. She gazed down at the ground, her head still pounding, before turning to face the girl. "What are you?" Lilith hissed, trying to control her fear. The girl tilted her head to the side, a cruel smile crossing her lips. "That looks like it hurts," she said, before glancing over at the casket. Lilith shook her head, a freezing feeling coursing through her body. She couldn't hold back the fear any longer. "No," she said firmly. "Go on," the girl taunted. "Don't you want to know why everyone is here? I'm sure you already have an idea." "Go to hell!" Lilith shouted, directing her anger towards Az. The girl remained silent, her gaze fixed on the casket as the rain intensified, mist turning to a deluge that pelted the surrounding grass and gravestones. As her family and friends sought refuge under the protective covering of chairs, Lilith shifted her attention to the black box, her heart heavy with grief. "It's time," someone urged her. With a heavy swallow, Lilith approached the casket, her head throbbing with each step. The rain seemed to pass through her, and she moved in a surreal, ghostly silence. Her footing faltered, and she stumbled, tears and raindrops blurring her vision. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she stood before the casket, the rain cascading off its silken black surface. But when she looked down, she saw neither her reflection nor the face of the departed. With a sharp intake of breath, she focused on the name engraved on the stone marker before her. Upon seeing her name, Lilith Allison, and the dates 1993-2023, her stomach dropped. Lilith felt the air rush out of her lungs and her legs buckle underneath her. Collapsing onto the damp grass, she asked, "What happened?" Her head pounded with pain. "I'm sorry," Az said, coming to stand beside her. Lilith looked up, but the girl had disappeared. She scanned her surroundings, her eyes wide, and realized she was alone. "Hello!" Lilith shouted, pushing herself up and spinning around. The world was deserted. Suddenly, thunder roared from above. Lilith gazed up and caught a glimpse of lightning before everything went dark. Lilith jolted awake, her surroundings unfamiliar until she recognized her bedroom. Her dream still lingered in her mind, causing her to take a deep breath. She leaped out of bed and dashed through her room, into the living room, and out into the hallway. Craving the outside world, she hurried down the corridor but collided with something, causing her to stumble. She steadied herself against the wall and was surprised when a man offered her a helping hand. "You can see me?" Lilith asked, her eyes widening in disbelief. The man rolled his eyes. "I already apologized. What more do you want?" As he passed by her and continued down the hallway, Lilith simply watched him without saying a word. After he disappeared, Lilith turned her attention to the front door. The frosted glass revealed a sunny day, unlike the rainy nightmare she had just experienced. Lilith walked up to the door, opened it, and breathed in the fresh air. She stepped onto the sidewalk and decided she needed to call Kelly and inform her that she wouldn't be coming in today. Instead, she would visit her mother or just stay home and watch TV to help calm her nerves. Suddenly, a voice interrupted her thoughts, causing Lilith to freeze. It was the same small, airy voice that had haunted her nightmares. Lilith slowly turned around, only to find a little girl wearing a red jacket with her blonde hair tied up in a ponytail, just like in her dream. Or was it really just a dream? Az smiled at Lilith as she started to back away in fear. "I thought you were going to escape from me for a moment there," she said.